I remember that day so clearly it makes my stomach turn. It was a Saturday afternoon, just a regular trip to Target with my wife, Emily, and our 2 kids, Liam, who's 6, and Ava, who just turned 4. We'd spent the morning at the park, and Target was supposed to be a quick stop before heading home. The store was busy but not chaotic, just the usual weekend crowd. I was pushing the cart while Emily compared prices on laundry detergent, and the kids were arguing over which cereal they wanted. Everything felt so normal, so painfully normal. Then the first bang. It was loud but not immediately alarming. Something falling from a shelf maybe? A dropped pallet in the stockroom? But then came the second bang, and the screaming. That's when my stomach turned to ice. People were running toward us from the front of the store, knocking over carts, screaming. A woman with a baby in her arms tripped and fell hard on the tile. A man grabbed his wife's wrist and yanked her so fast she nearly lost a shoe. I barely had time to process what was happening before I saw the sheer terror in people's eyes. I grabbed Liam and Ava without thinking, one under each arm. Emily was right beside me, already scanning for cover. More shots rang out, sharp cracks that sent chills down my spine. The sound echoed through the aisles, mixing with the wailing alarms that had started blaring overhead. My heart was slamming in my chest, but I forced myself to move. We ducked behind one of the checkout counters, pressing our bodies against the cold metal. I wrapped my arms around the kids as tightly as I could, trying to make myself as small as possible. Emily had her hand over her mouth, shaking so badly I thought she might pass out. I peeked around the corner, and that's when I saw him. A young guy, maybe early 20s, walking slowly through the aisles, completely calm. He was dressed in dark clothes, a hoodie pulled up over his head. He held the gun low like he wasn't in a hurry, like he was just browsing. That was the part that made my skin crawl, the casualness. He had walked in just minutes before, blending in like any other customer. And now he was hunting. I could hear Ava whimpering against my chest, her tiny hands clutching my shirt. Liam was dead silent, but I could feel him trembling. Emily had a grip on my arm so tight it hurt. I wanted to tell them it was going to be okay, but I couldn't. I didn't know if it would be. More shots, a loud crash, something shattering. People sobbing, whispering prayers. I pressed my back against the counter, trying to control my breathing. If we panicked, if we moved too soon, we could end up right in his path. A man a few checkout lanes down tried to run for the doors, dragging his teenage daughter behind him. The gunman turned his head slightly and raised the weapon. A deafening shot rang out. The man dropped. His daughter screamed so loud it cut through the alarms. My entire body locked up. The shooter didn't rush after her. He just moved on, walking deeper into the store. I wanted to throw up. My brain was screaming at me to do something, anything, but what? We were sitting ducks. Then, the worst thing happened. Ava started to cry. Not a whimper, but a real shaky sob. I clamped a hand over her mouth, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would shake the floor. The gunman wasn't far. If he heard her, God, if he heard her. Emily's eyes were wide with pure panic, her hands pressed over Liam's ears. I stroked Ava's hair, whispering, "Shh, baby, please, shh." She buried her face against me, her tiny body shaking like a leaf. Suddenly, a new sound, sirens, blaring from outside. Police. The shooter must have heard them too because he turned, his posture shifting for the first time. A moment of hesitation. He looked toward the entrance, then back toward the store, like he was deciding what to do. My heart seized. This could be our chance. I met Emily's eyes and we both knew. This was the moment. If we were going to run, it had to be now. I shifted Ava in my arms, tightening my grip on Liam's hand. My legs felt like they were made of cement, but I forced myself up, staying low. "Go," I mouthed to Emily. She nodded, swallowing hard, and we started moving. Other people had the same idea. From behind shelves and counters, desperate shoppers bolted for the emergency exits. A woman clutching a toddler stumbled ahead of us, her face streaked with tears. A Target employee, just a kid, maybe 17, was helping an older man limp toward the back. The alarms kept wailing, the store now filled with the sounds of sheer survival. My only focus was getting my family out. We stayed low, weaving through the aisles, my pulse pounding in my ears. I kept my eyes locked on the shooter's position, praying he wouldn't turn our way. Then, another shot. Close. Too close. A shelf near us exploded, sending cereal boxes flying. Emily let out a small yelp, clapping a hand over her mouth immediately. My body moved on instinct, shoving her and the kids toward a side corridor. A stockroom door, there. I slammed into it shoulder first, nearly falling through as it swung open. We stumbled into the dimly lit back area, surrounded by pallets and crates. More people were there, crouched behind boxes, holding their breath. Someone was whispering frantically into a phone, 911 probably. The heavy metal exit door loomed ahead, just feet away. We were almost out. I bolted for the exit, gripping Liam's hand so tightly he let out a small whimper. Emily was right behind me, clutching Ava against her chest. The metal door was heavy, but I pushed with everything I had. It burst open, flooding us with the cold evening air. The moment my feet hit the pavement, I felt like I could breathe again. But only for a second. The parking lot was pure chaos. People were sprinting in every direction, ducking behind cars, screaming for loved ones. Sirens flashed red and blue, police officers shouting orders as they took position near the entrance. Some shoppers had collapsed on the pavement, sobbing in shock. Others clutched their phones, calling family, calling 911, though I knew the cops were already here. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to keep moving, pulling Emily and the kids toward the far end of the lot. We just had to get distance. Then, another shot, this time from inside the store. I flinched, whipping my head around. Officers were yelling something into a megaphone, ordering the shooter to drop his weapon. My stomach twisted. I didn't know if he would. I didn't know if more people were still trapped inside. My body wanted to run, but my mind was stuck, frozen in that moment of pure helplessness. And then, silence. A long, terrible silence. Until, pop. Pop. 2 more shots, not from the shooter this time, from the police. A final gut-wrenching scream echoed from the entrance. And then, nothing. Just the sound of my own heartbeat, hammering in my ears. I stood there, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Around me, people were crying, clutching each other, whispering prayers. I looked down at Liam and Ava. Liam was gripping my arm so tightly his knuckles were white, and Ava had buried her face in Emily's shoulder, shaking. They shouldn't have seen this. No child should ever have to witness something like this. Minutes passed before an officer approached us, his face grim but calm. "Are you all okay?" he asked, his voice steady, practiced. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was telling the truth. He gestured for us to move further back, away from the entrance, where a group of survivors was gathering near the police blockade. I couldn't stop looking at the store, at the place we had been just minutes ago, where normal life had shattered like broken glass. More officers entered the store, weapons drawn, sweeping through the aisles. Medics rushed in behind them, pushing gurneys. I turned away before I could see too much. I didn't want to know who wasn't coming out. I didn't want to see bodies lying where we had just stood, where my kids had been. I squeezed my eyes shut and whispered, "It's over. We're safe." But the words felt hollow. We sat on the curb, wrapped in thin emergency blankets the paramedics had given us. Emily held Ava, rocking her gently. Liam just stared at the ground, silent. The officers would need statements, but right now, no one was pressuring us. We weren't the only ones in shock. I knew eventually we'd drive home, put the kids to bed, try to return to normal. But how do you go back to normal after this? How do you ever feel safe in a store again? I still don't know. I don't think I ever will. I started working the overnight shift at Walmart about 6 months ago. It wasn't my dream job or anything, but the pay was decent, and I liked the quiet. There's something weirdly peaceful about those fluorescent lit aisles when the store is nearly empty. just a handful of employees stocking shelves and rearranging displays. My usual shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and after a while, I got into the rhythm of things. Stock, organize, break, repeat. It was easy enough. The only thing that ever really broke the monotony was the occasional customer wandering in at odd hours, looking like they had no idea how they ended up there. But that night was different. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I decided to take my break. I wasn't particularly tired, just needed to stretch my legs. I grabbed a bottle of Coke from the cooler and stepped into the back storage area, where the shelves were lined with pallets of unopened boxes. The air back there always felt different, stale somehow, like the ventilation didn't quite reach that far. As I leaned against a stack of boxes, sipping my drink, I saw him. An older guy in a faded blue vest, walking slowly toward the rear of the storage area. He had this kind of hunched-over posture, like years of lifting heavy boxes had worn him down. His hair was gray, thinning at the top, and his face looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place him. I figured he was just another employee from a different shift, maybe a janitor or an old-timer who had been working here forever. But something about him felt off. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't look up, just walked with this slow, deliberate pace like he had a destination in mind. I watched as he disappeared past the stacks of merchandise, heading toward the fire exit that no one ever used. It struck me as odd. Why would an employee be heading that way? That door was always locked, and if he was on break, why wasn't he in the lounge? I shrugged it off at first, finishing my drink before heading back out to the sales floor. An hour later, I casually mentioned it to my manager, Greg. I wasn't expecting anything weird, just making small talk. Hey, do we have an older guy working overnight? Short, gray hair, kinda hunched? Greg gave me a strange look. No. Why? I explained what I saw, and he frowned. Dude, no one like that works here. I laughed, assuming he just didn't know everyone. I swear, I saw him walking toward the back. Thought maybe he was maintenance or something. Greg shook his head. Nah. The only guy that fits that description was old Jim, but he stopped mid-sentence, his face shifting from confusion to something else. Something that almost looked like discomfort. Greg's reaction put me on edge. But he what? I pressed. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Jim passed away. Like 5 years ago. He said it casually, like it was just another fact, but something in his expression told me he wasn't as indifferent as he sounded. I felt a weird chill creep up my spine. You sure? Because I saw someone who looked exactly like that. Greg shrugged. Unless someone's walking around here looking like a dead guy, yeah, I'm sure. He didn't seem interested in continuing the conversation, and I wasn't sure I wanted to either. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I knew what I saw. It wasn't a shadow or some trick of the light. It was a person. The way he moved, the way his shoes scuffed against the concrete floor. It was too real. And there was something else gnawing at me. The familiarity. I had seen that face before. But where? It bugged me the rest of my shift, to the point where I barely focused on stocking shelves. I kept glancing toward the back of the store, half expecting to see him again, but the storage area remained empty. Around 4 a.m., when things slowed down, I wandered into the break room to grab a snack from the vending machine. That's when I noticed the old bulletin board. It was one of those cork ones covered in faded flyers and outdated notices, stuff that no one ever bothered to take down. My eyes skimmed over employee announcements, a safety poster, a schedule from months ago, and then I saw it. Tucked in the corner, partially covered by a paper about holiday overtime, was an old memorial notice. The edges were curled, the ink slightly faded, but I could still read the name. James Jim Carson. I felt my stomach drop. Beneath the name was a grainy photo of a man in a Walmart vest, smiling slightly at the camera. He looked older than in my memory, but it was unmistakably him. The guy I had seen walking into the storage area. The guy who, according to Greg, hadn't worked here in years. The guy who was supposed to be dead. I stared at the photo for what felt like forever, my mind struggling to make sense of it. I had just seen him. I knew I had. So how the hell was his face on a 5-year-old memorial notice? I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that memorial notice. But eventually, my body remembered how to move. I ripped the paper off the board and took it straight to Greg. "This is the guy I saw," I told him, my voice quieter than I expected it to be. He took the paper, glanced at it, and sighed. "Yeah, that's Jim." He paused, his fingers tightening around the edges of the notice. "You really saw him?" I nodded. Clear as day. He walked right past me toward the back. Greg's expression darkened. "Look, man, I don't want to freak you out, but you're not the first person to say that." Apparently, over the years, multiple employees had reported seeing someone matching Jim's description in the storage area. Always late at night, always heading toward the fire exit. No one ever saw him coming in, and no one ever saw him leave. A few people even tried to follow him once, but the moment they turned a corner, he was gone. Just vanished. It had become sort of a quiet legend among the overnight staff. One of those things people joked about but never wanted to talk about too much. "Store's been here forever," Greg said, stuffing the notice back into his pocket. "Lots of people come and go, some don't leave." I didn't go back to the storage area for the rest of my shift. I finished my work with a strange, unsettled feeling in my chest, hyper-aware of every little sound around me. Every footstep, every creak. When I clocked out at 6 a.m., I practically ran to my car, heart hammering against my ribs. I told myself it was just exhaustion. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, I made the mistake of glancing in my rearview mirror. Standing near the back exit, just barely visible under the dim glow of a flickering streetlight, was Jim. Same faded vest, same tired posture, just standing there, watching. I never took another overnight shift again. I was never the type to be easily rattled. I grew up in a big city, took the subway at night, and knew how to keep my guard up. But what happened last summer at Walmart still makes my skin crawl. It was a regular Tuesday evening, and I had just gotten off work. I stopped by to grab a few things, just the usual, some snacks, a new shower curtain, maybe a candle if I felt like treating myself. The store was pretty empty, just the occasional tired parent or lone shopper like me, minding their own business. I liked that kind of quiet. But then, I noticed him. At first, I didn't think much of it. A guy in a dark hoodie, maybe late 30s, unshaven, with those tired eyes that either meant he'd had a long day or just never slept enough. He was in the same aisle as me while I browsed the snacks. No big deal. But when I moved to the next aisle, paper towels, cleaning supplies, there he was again. Still not grabbing anything, just lingering. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But then it kept happening. Every aisle I went to, he was there, never picking anything up, just existing too close. By the time I made it to the pet food aisle, I felt that creeping discomfort settle in my stomach. I hadn't even glanced at him directly, but I knew he was still there. My mind started running through the usual logic. Was I being paranoid? Was it a coincidence? But my gut was screaming at me that something was off. So I tested it. I suddenly switched direction, cutting through the clothing section, then beelining for home goods. And sure enough, minutes later, there he was, a few aisles down, pretending to look at shelves but never really touching anything. That was when my phone buzzed. I remember the way my breath hitched before I even pulled it out of my pocket. It was an unknown number. A single message. Blue shirt, gray jeans. Cute choice today. My heart stopped. That was exactly what I was wearing. I felt the blood drain from my face as I forced myself to turn, every muscle in my body screaming at me not to. And there he was, at the end of the aisle, holding his phone, staring right at me. I froze. My first instinct was to look around, to see if maybe, just maybe, this was some kind of cruel joke. Maybe a friend messing with me? But I didn't know anyone who would do something like this, and the way he was standing there, unmoving, phone still in his hand, made my stomach churn. He wasn't just watching me, he was waiting. I forced myself to swallow the panic rising in my throat. I wasn't about to let him know how scared I was. Instead, I gripped my phone tighter and turned my back on him, pretending to be unfazed. But my heart was pounding so hard I swore he could hear it. I needed to get out of there, but I didn't want to make it obvious. I casually placed a random hand towel in my basket, then made my way toward the front of the store, willing my legs to move at a normal pace. The fluorescent lights above hummed, casting everything in that weird, artificial glow. As I walked, I glanced at the reflection in the glass refrigerator doors, scanning for movement. There he was, still following a few aisles over. I could feel the adrenaline surging through me, making my hands tremble. I needed to do something. Just outside the store, cars rolled lazily through the parking lot. If I could just make it to the front, maybe I could lose him. Then, another buzz, another message. Leaving so soon? My breath hitched. He knew. He knew I was trying to get away. My fingers fumbled over my screen as I hurried to unlock my phone, my mind racing between calling someone or heading straight for a cashier and making a scene. I didn't care if I looked stupid. But before I could do either, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. Movement. Fast. Deliberate. I turned just in time to see him stepping out from the next aisle, cutting across my path like he was trying to intercept me. Panic gripped me. I abandoned all pretense of staying calm and bolted toward the self-checkout lanes, practically slamming my basket down on the scanner. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely swipe my card. I didn't even bag my items, I just grabbed them and turned toward the exit. But as I rushed forward, something made me stop dead in my tracks. He wasn't behind me anymore. I whipped my head around, scanning the store, the checkout lanes, the aisles. He was gone. For a second, I thought maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe he had just walked off, maybe I was overreacting. But then, as I stepped outside, my phone vibrated again. My hands were clammy as I pulled it out, my breath shallow. Another message from the unknown number. See you soon. That was it. 2 simple words that made my blood run cold. My eyes darted around the parking lot, scanning the rows of cars, the dim streetlights casting long, eerie shadows. Where was he? I didn't see him anywhere. But that was somehow worse. I practically ran to my car, my keys clutched so tightly in my fist they left indentations in my palm. My car was parked near the far end of the lot, and every step felt like I was being watched, like he could be anywhere, waiting behind a car, lurking just out of sight. I hit the unlock button before I even reached the door, yanked it open, and threw myself inside, locking it the second I was in. My hands shook as I started the engine, my mind screaming at me to just go. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him standing there, watching me leave. But there was nothing. I drove straight home, my heart still hammering against my ribs, replaying everything over and over in my head. The way he followed me, the way he knew what I was wearing, the way he vanished right when I tried to get away. I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking the locks, peeking out the window, convinced that at any second my phone would buzz again. But it never did. I never went back to that Walmart, never got another text from that number. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but to this day, the thought that unsettles me the most isn't that he followed me or even that he messaged me. It's the fact that he disappeared so easily, like he was never really there at all. I used to think I was the kind of person who paid attention to her surroundings. You know, always checking over my shoulder, keeping my keys between my fingers like a weapon, all the usual precautions women take without even thinking. But the night this happened, I realized just how easily someone can get caught off guard, no matter how careful they think they are. This was a few years ago when I lived in a quiet town in Indiana. It wasn't the kind of place where people worried about crime. I'd gone to Walmart late that night around 11:30 p.m., just to grab a few things: milk, bread, a frozen pizza. Nothing urgent, but I had the next day off and figured I'd stock up. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a handful of cars scattered around, and the overhead lights cast long, eerie shadows on the pavement. I remember feeling a little uneasy as I stepped out of the store, but I brushed it off. It was probably just the weird silence, the way my footsteps sounded too loud in the open lot. My car was parked a few rows down, not too far, but far enough that I had to walk past several empty spaces. I had my keys in my right hand, my left gripping the plastic bag tight enough to make my fingers hurt. Then I heard it. Fast, heavy footsteps behind me. At first I thought maybe it was just another shopper, but something about the way they moved sent a jolt of panic straight through me. They weren't just walking, they were closing the distance between us. I picked up my pace. My heart started pounding, my breath coming quicker. My car was maybe 10 feet away. I told myself not to run, not to make it obvious that I was scared, but then I felt it. A hand grabbing my upper arm, strong, yanking me back so hard I almost dropped my groceries. I gasped, twisted, tried to break free, but he was stronger than me. My keys clattered to the pavement as he pulled me backward towards something behind me. That's when I saw it. The van. A dark-colored van with tinted windows, parked a few spaces away. My mind barely had time to register what was happening before I realized where he was trying to take me. I kicked, thrashed, did everything I could to make myself difficult to hold. I screamed, loud, hoping someone, anyone, would hear me. But my voice felt swallowed by the emptiness of the lot. He didn't say a word, just tightened his grip, dragging me inch by inch. I could feel the cold metal of the van's side against my shoulder, the door already slightly open. My legs almost buckled as I realized how close I was to being shoved inside. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything changed. A car pulled into the parking lot, its headlights sweeping across us. The second those beams hit, my attacker let go. Just like that. His grip vanished, and I stumbled forward, nearly falling. My breath was ragged, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stay on my feet. I turned, expecting to see him still reaching for me, but he was already moving. He sprinted back toward the van, his dark clothes blending into the night. I wanted to chase after him to get a better look, but my body was frozen. I could only watch as he threw himself into the passenger side, and before I could react, the van peeled out of the lot, tires screeching against the pavement. I stood there, gasping for air, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The car that had pulled in, the one that unknowingly saved me, was still idling a few spaces away. The driver, a middle-aged man with glasses, stepped out, frowning as he looked in my direction. "You okay?" he called. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out at first. My throat felt tight, my chest still heaving. I nodded quickly, bending down to grab my keys with trembling fingers. He hesitated for a moment before walking toward the store, giving me one last glance before disappearing inside. I got into my car, locked the doors, and just sat there. My hands were shaking too much to put the key in the ignition. I tried to take deep breaths, tried to calm down, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. What if that car hadn't pulled in when it did? What if no one had been around? How many seconds away had I been from vanishing without a trace? My stomach twisted at the thought. I finally managed to start the car, but I couldn't drive yet. I just gripped the steering wheel, white-knuckled, trying to convince myself that I was safe now. But I didn't feel safe. After a few minutes, I forced myself to move. I backed out of the parking space, my eyes darting around the lot, half expecting to see the van again. It was gone, but that didn't mean they weren't still out there. I drove straight home, my heart still hammering in my chest. The whole way I kept checking my mirrors, terrified I'd see those headlights trailing behind me. I didn't. But even after I locked myself inside my apartment, double-checking every door and window, I still felt like I wasn't alone. I barely slept that night. Every little noise made me jump. Cars passing outside, the hum of my fridge, even the sound of my own breathing. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I kept replaying the moment he grabbed me, the feeling of his fingers digging into my arm, the sheer force of him pulling me back. I thought about the van, about how long it had probably been there just waiting. That was the worst part, knowing this wasn't random. They had been watching, waiting for the right moment, and I had walked right into it. The next morning, I went straight to the police station. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just threw on yesterday's hoodie, shoved my hair into a messy bun and drove, my hands still unsteady on the wheel. When I got there, I told them everything, how the guy grabbed me, how he tried to drag me to the van, how they sped off when another car arrived. The officer taking my statement, a guy named Detective Harris, nodded as he scribbled down notes. He asked me for details, the van's color, the man's height, anything I could remember. But the truth was, everything had happened so fast. My memory felt scrambled like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. They pulled up the security footage from Walmart while I was there. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The van had been circling the lot for over an hour before I walked out. I watched as it crept through the rows of parked cars, pausing now and then before moving again, like they were hunting. Watching myself on that screen, completely unaware, made my stomach turn. Then I saw him, my attacker. He had been standing near the entrance, pretending to check his phone, watching people come and go. He didn't follow anyone else, just me. That realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't bad luck. I was targeted. Maybe it was because I was alone, maybe because I looked distracted, maybe just because I was the first person to park far enough from the entrance. But whatever the reason, they had picked me. And if that car hadn't pulled in at the right time, I might not have been there to watch that footage. That thought made my hands go cold. The police took everything seriously, which helped, but there wasn't much they could do. The security footage didn't show the van's license plate. Either it was covered, or the angle just didn't catch it. The guy who grabbed me kept his head down the whole time, and with the hood he was wearing, his face wasn't clear enough to make an ID. Detective Harris told me they'd keep an eye out for any similar reports, but without more information, tracking them down would be difficult. That didn't exactly make me feel better. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the paranoia. Every time I walked to my car, I felt like someone was behind me. I started parking as close to store entrances as possible, even if it meant waiting for a spot. I carried pepper spray in my hand before I even stepped outside. And every time I saw a van with tinted windows, my stomach twisted into knots. It's crazy how one moment can change the way you see the world. Before that night, I never thought twice about late-night grocery runs. Now, I don't go anywhere alone after dark. I never found out who they were or what they wanted, but deep down I know. They weren't looking to rob me. They wanted me. And I was seconds away from disappearing into that van. Maybe I would have been found. Maybe not. Maybe I would have ended up as just another missing person, a blurry photo on a poster that people glance at but don't really see. That's the part that still haunts me. How easily it could have gone the other way. How, in some other version of that night, I never made it home. I still think about it sometimes, especially when I see stories of women who go missing. I wonder if they had a moment like mine, a moment where they almost got away, but no headlights pulled in to save them. I got lucky. That's all it was, pure stupid luck. And I hate thinking about all the people who weren't. I've been working the night shift at Walmart for almost a year now. It's not the worst job in the world, but it has its moments. Mostly the long, dragging hours when there's barely a soul in the store. The break room is my little escape. A tiny, windowless box with a couple of old vending machines, a microwave that smells permanently of burnt popcorn, and a round table surrounded by mismatched chairs. That night was just like any other. My 15-minute break had just started, and I was sitting at the far end of the room scrolling through my phone, half watching some random TikTok while trying not to think about the rest of my shift. I heard the door creak open behind me. The break room door is heavy, so it always makes this dragging sound when someone comes in. I didn't bother looking up. Probably just another employee grabbing a snack or killing time like me. I heard the soft scrape of a chair being pulled out, followed by the barely audible sound of someone sitting down. They were behind me, at the table. I figured it was one of the stock guys, maybe Brian or Ethan. They barely talk unless they have to, so I wasn't surprised they didn't say anything. A couple of minutes passed and I kept scrolling. The room was quiet, aside from the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional distant beep from the registers up front. I had this weird feeling, though. You know that sense you get when someone's looking at you? It started creeping in, making the back of my neck prickle. It didn't feel like anything serious, just one of those odd moments when your brain convinces you there's something off when there probably isn't. I brushed it off and absent-mindedly opened my camera. I don't even remember why I did it, but I took a quick selfie using the mirror on the opposite wall. Just boredom, I guess. Then, out of habit, I finally glanced over my shoulder. The chair was empty. The one I had heard move. The one I knew someone had sat in. I blinked a few times, staring at it, my stomach tightening in this slow, creeping way. Maybe they had left and I just hadn't noticed. That didn't make sense, though. The door hadn't made a sound. It always creaks, always drags across the floor. I swallowed, trying to shake off the unease, and turned back to my phone. That's when I saw the photo. The mirror selfie I had just taken. My reflection was clear, my tired face lit by the screen, but in the reflection of the chair behind me, there was something. A blurry, dark figure sitting exactly where I had heard them sit. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, my fingers suddenly stiff, a cold sensation creeping up my arms. The figure wasn't clear. It was out of focus, like a smudge in the air, but it was there, sitting, waiting. I could make out the vague shape of a head, shoulders hunched slightly forward like someone watching me. The longer I stared, the more my stomach twisted. I turned around again, slower this time, scanning every inch of the break room. Still empty. Just the chair, still slightly pushed out from the table. But I knew what I had heard. I knew what I had seen. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a glitch? A weird reflection? But the mirror wasn't warped, and I had taken plenty of pictures in that room before without anything like this happening. My hands felt unsteady as I opened my camera again and turned to face the mirror. I lifted my phone, angling it just like before, and snapped another picture. Then another. Each time I checked the image immediately. Nothing. The chair stayed empty. No smudges, no shadows, no blurry figures. I exhaled, trying to steady my nerves. Maybe I was just exhausted. Night shifts do weird things to your brain, but even as I tried to brush it off, the uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't leave. The room felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. I stood up abruptly, shoving my phone into my pocket, and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, I hesitated. The nagging sensation of being watched hadn't faded. If anything, it had gotten worse. My skin prickled, and I realized, this whole time, I hadn't heard the vending machine humming, or the fridge, or the distant beeping from the registers. The silence wasn't just heavy, it was unnatural. I bolted, I pushed through the door, and hurried down the back hallway, my heart pounding. The second I stepped into the main store, the sounds rushed back in. The low murmur of the overnight radio, the hum of the freezers, the distant sound of a cart squeaking as someone restocked shelves. I stood there for a moment just breathing, trying to shake off whatever the hell had just happened. Then slowly I pulled my phone back out. My fingers hesitated over the screen before I opened my camera roll again. The picture was still there, the figure, still sitting behind me. I thought about deleting the picture right then and there, just erasing it and pretending none of this ever happened. But something stopped me. I didn't want to look at it anymore, but I also didn't want to lose proof that it had actually happened, that I wasn't just overtired and imagining things. Instead, I locked my phone and shoved it deep into my pocket, trying to shake off the feeling that something was still lingering behind me. I went back to work, but I couldn't concentrate. Every time I passed the break room, I felt a cold pressure in my chest, like stepping into a place I wasn't supposed to be. I avoided going inside for the rest of my shift, and when my final break came, I just wandered the store instead. When I finally clocked out and stepped into the parking lot, the night air felt sharp and real against my skin. I breathed it in like I'd been holding my breath for hours. I barely slept that morning. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blurry figure in the chair just sitting there watching. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of the break room, except it was wrong. The lights were buzzing too loud, the vending machines were empty and broken, and the chair wasn't empty anymore. I woke up drenched in sweat, my phone clutched tight in my hand. The first thing I did was check the picture. It was still there, still the same. I haven't worked at that Walmart in months. I quit a few weeks after that night, not just because of what happened, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. I never went back into that break room, but sometimes I still think about it. About the silence, about the way the air felt wrong, and about the thing that was there, but wasn't. The picture is still in my phone, buried deep in my gallery. I tell myself I'll delete it one day, but I never do, because some small, terrified part of me knows. If I look at it again, I might see something new. I've been working at Walmart for about a year now, night shifts mostly. It's not a bad job, just repetitive. Stocking shelves, helping the occasional lost customer, cleaning up the random messes people leave behind. It's mindless work, which is exactly what I needed after dropping out of college. That night was like any other, or at least it started that way. It was around 2 a.m. when I took my break. The store was nearly empty, aside from a few late-night shoppers and the usual crew working the registers. I grabbed a soda from the break room fridge and headed to the restroom, not expecting anything unusual. As soon as I stepped inside, I noticed something was off. The bathroom was empty, silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. But then I saw it. The last stall, door slightly open, someone standing inside, just standing. I could see their legs, bare, pale, feet slightly turned inward. They weren't using the toilet, weren't moving at all, just standing there. I figured maybe they were waiting for someone or just drunk, so I ignored it and went into a stall closer to the sinks. I tried to shake the weird feeling creeping up my spine, but something about it didn't sit right with me. I did my business quickly, feeling uncomfortably aware of the silent presence behind me. When I stepped out, I glanced toward the last stall again. The door was still ajar. The person hadn't moved. I turned on the faucet, letting the rush of water drown out my unease, and kept my eyes down as I lathered my hands. Just a weirdo, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. Then, as I reached for a paper towel, I made the mistake of looking up. In the mirror behind me, where there should have been empty space, stood the person. Close. Too close. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Their reflection was sharper than it should have been, the fluorescent lights casting unnatural shadows across their face. But that wasn't what made my stomach drop. It was their eyes. Wide, unblinking, staring directly into mine. My first instinct was to turn around, but I couldn't. My body refused to move, like some primal part of me knew better. Instead, I stood there staring into the mirror, my breath shallow and uneven. The figure behind me was tall, lanky, their skin almost wrong, like it didn't fit quite right. Their mouth was slightly open, lips dry and cracked, but they didn't speak. They didn't blink. They just stood there, motionless, staring at me as if waiting for something. I forced myself to move, just a little. My fingers twitched, my muscles finally unlocking from whatever invisible grip was holding them. I turned my head, just a fraction, to look at them directly. But there was nothing there. The bathroom was empty. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I spun fully around, searching every corner. The stall door was still ajar, but it was empty. No one was there. But when I looked back at the mirror, my stomach twisted. The reflection hadn't changed. They were still there, standing behind me, closer now. I staggered back, slamming into the sink, knocking over the soap dispenser. My breathing came in ragged gasps, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering to myself, "You're just tired. "You're just tired." When I opened them again, the mirror was normal. My own reflection, pale and shaken, staring back at me. I didn't waste another second. I bolted out of the bathroom, my sneakers squeaking against the tile as I nearly tripped over my own feet. The moment I was out in the brightly lit store, the air felt lighter, more real. The sound of distant beeping checkouts and the hum of the overhead speakers grounded me. I turned, expecting, hoping, to see some logical explanation. But when I glanced back at the restroom door, it was still slightly open. And in the sliver of darkness beyond, I swear I saw a pale hand retreating out of sight. I didn't go back. Not to the bathroom, not even near it. I spent the rest of my break pacing near the electronics section, trying to convince myself that I was just overtired, that my brain had played some weird trick on me. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in there with me. Something that shouldn't have been. My shift dragged on, every shadow in the empty aisles making my skin crawl. I kept glancing toward the restroom, half expecting to see that pale hand again. At around 4 a.m., my coworker, Mark, showed up to cover the last few hours of the shift. He's been at this Walmart for years, one of those guys who's seen it all. I figured if anyone knew about weird stuff happening, it'd be him. I pulled him aside near the stockroom, lowering my voice. "Hey man, has anything weird ever happened in the bathrooms here?" I expected him to laugh, maybe give me a weird look. But he didn't. Instead, he just sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Last stall, right?" he said, his voice quieter than usual. A cold weight settled in my stomach. I nodded. Mark glanced around like he was making sure no customers were nearby, then leaned in. "You're not the first one to see something," he muttered. "Happens every few months. Someone comes out pale as a ghost, shaking, saying they saw something in the mirror." He hesitated, then added, "One guy swore he saw himself, but different. Another guy said he saw someone standing behind him, just staring." A chill ran down my spine. "So what the hell is it?" I asked, my voice lower now. Mark shook his head. "No clue. But if I were you, I wouldn't use that bathroom alone again." His tone was light, but there was something in his eyes, something that told me he wasn't joking. I wanted to laugh it off, pretend it was just some workplace ghost story. But I knew what I saw, and that was the last time I ever stepped foot in that restroom again. I avoided that bathroom like the plague after that night. If I needed to go, I'd either hold it or use the employee restroom in the back. I tried to move on, let it become just another weird memory, but something about it stuck with me. The way that thing had looked in the mirror, too sharp, too still. The way it had disappeared when I turned around but remained in the reflection. It wasn't normal. It wasn't just my imagination. About a week later, I heard one of the new hires, Jason, complaining in the break room. "Dude, I swear someone was in the last stall just standing there. Creeped me the hell out." My stomach dropped. I didn't say anything, but I could see Mark watching me from across the room, his face unreadable. Jason laughed it off, said he was probably just paranoid, but I saw the way he kept glancing at the restroom door afterward. A month later, I quit. Not just because of that night. Walmart night shifts weren't exactly my dream job, but that experience had changed something in me, made me more aware of things I used to ignore. I started noticing small, strange details in other places, reflections that seemed a little off, shadows that lingered a bit too long. Maybe it was all in my head, paranoia feeding on itself. Or maybe I'd just seen something I wasn't supposed to. I never found out what was in that bathroom, maybe I never will. But sometimes when I catch my reflection in a dark screen or a dimly lit window, I hesitate before looking away. Because a part of me is always afraid that one day I'll see it again, standing right behind me,